This is Gemara Metziah, Daf Ayin Hey and Baruch Hashem. Another exciting day in the world of Daf, as hopefully we'll be concluding this difficult, intricate, and long perek of Ezeu Neshech B'Siyata Dishmaya. We pick it up in the bottom of Ayin Dalid Amid Beis. We're about 8 lines from the bottom, right after the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, we began with arrangements between lending people money to pay back. Not lending money, lending an item, lending wheat to pay back based on the price of what it's going to be worth, etc., etc. And in classical Gemara form, the Brisa will begin by, we'll begin by elaborating on the din of the Mishnah. Tanu Rabbanan teaches the Gemara Mavadim as Arisa v'chita b'chitin lezera. One is allowed to give his aris. An aris is a sharecropper. An aris is a person that works the field and takes a percentage. You're allowed to, you're allowed to lend wheat, b'chitin, and he's going to pay you back the same amount of wheat, lezera, when the wheat is being used to plant. But Medvar Mamurim says the Gemara Shlo Yared. This is only in the scenario when he has not yet started working the field. Aval Yared, Yarad. But if the sharecropper has already began working the field, Aser, then it is Aser. So the Brisa elaborates a little bit deeper on the din of the Mishnah. The Mishnah taught the same din. The Mava Adam is Haris of Chita V'Chitin Lezera. The Brisa here in the Gemara comes along and says, but if it's Yarad, if you already began working, then it's us. Says the Gemara, Maishna Tana Dion come Avli Ben Yarad. Or Maishna Tana Brad come Avli Ben Yarad. Says the Gemara, what's the difference between our Mishnah and this Brisa? Our Mishnah clearly does not differentiate between whether he began working, and over here he does. So Amar Rava, says Rava, Ravidi Esbarni Ale, Ravidi explained to me. Basra Tatanadi done in the place of our Mishnah, Risa Yov Bizra. In the place of our Mishnah, the aris, the sharecropper, would usually give the seed. Bein Yarad, Bein Lo Yarad. And therefore, whether he started or not, Kamid Lo Yav Bizra, Matzi Misalikle. Therefore, as long as he did not give the seed yet, the landowner can tell him, you usually provide the seeds, now you did not, therefore I'm taking over. And therefore, v'chika nachis, and therefore when he goes by himself, levatzir b'hachika nachis, and therefore what he's doing is he's giving less than the normal rate, because usually the owner doesn't give anything, and over here he is. But whereas the place of the Bryce, Mari Arayav Bizra, the owner is the one that always gives the seeds. And therefore, it depends whether the sharecropper began working or not. Ilo Yarad. If he did not start working yet, then the Mati Misalikle, then he could stop him. Because it's not dependent upon if he gave the seed or not, because the owner always gives the seed. So now it's dependent upon whether the sharecropper began practically to work the field. If he did not, then he could be Misalikim. But if you already started working, you can't stop him anymore, you already started, then it's going to be Aser. That's going to be the difference between our Mishnah and the Brisa. Technical detail, who's the one that usually supplies the seed for the crop. So now the Mishnah really got involved in chitin b'chitin, which is what we're going to call more colloquially sa b'sa, which is anytime you're making a halva, you're loaning money, an item to be paid back, the same item, which of course very quickly could be ribis, as the price that you're paying back often could be lower than the price that you gave it as, and very quickly it comes into ribis. So says the Gemara, Tanarabban, again at the bottom of Ayin Dalet Amid Beis. I'm Radim the Chaver, so I'm going to tell his friend. Halveni, lend me korchitin, v'koitzlei damim, and stipulate a price with him. Hoslo, if we became cheaper, nice and chitin, he gives him back the same amount of wheat. Hokru, if wheat went up, nice and demayim, you have to give them their original value. Says the Gemara, 1 second, the whole reason you stipulated, you created a price, so you don't have to be dependent upon the whims of the economics and the society. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Sheishes, Hachi Kamar. Im loy katzatz, that's the price meant. Then, Hozlu noisachit, Hokru noisachit, but Avada, if you're a katzatz, it's going to go based on the price that you're a katzatz. We continue with the next Mishnah on Ayin Hey Amid Aleph. Lo yomer adam nachavei royal veini korchitim ani etin l'chal legoyren. Give me a core of wheat and I'll give it back after the harvest by the threshing season. You're not allowed to. That's a classical sub, giving an item to get the same item back at a later date, which is going to have a different value. What are you allowed to tell him? Lend me some wheat until my son comes, until I find the key. And even in this, and similarly, Hillel would say, a woman should not lend a loaf of bread to her friend. Why? Until they create what the value of this loaf of bread is. But if not, if it's just a mere item, should not lend it. What's the reason? Maybe the price of chitin will fluctuate, and we're going to come to ribbis. This is the classical sub is sub. If I lend you a pound of potatoes and you pay me back a pound of potatoes, a month later that pound of potatoes is worth less or more, and therefore it's a form of ribbis as you're getting extra. Excuse me, as a borrower could potentially be paying more. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna. Now we're going to learn a rule which we have already seen, which is going to be the heter to a lot of these cases. Yesh loy. Amar Rav Huna, says Rav Huna, yesh loy sa. If you have a saw's worth of wheat, love a saw, then you're allowed to borrow a saw. Sasayim, loy v'sasayim. Meaning, if you already have the item, therefore you're allowed to borrow it. Why? Because then you could pay it back at any moment, and therefore we're not going to view it as a saw loan that someone is losing and gaining. That is Rav Huna. Amar Rav Yitzchak Amar comes like Rav Yitzchak, and he says, "Afilu yesh lo saw." Even if you only have one saw, loy v'oleh kamakur, and you let it borrow as much as you want. Today, Rav Chia, l'siyua Rav Yitzchak. Rav Chia comes along to support, to prove Rav Yitzchak. Says the Braisa, tipas yayin ein loy. If someone does not have even a drop of wine, then he could borrow wine. Shemen ein loy. Ha yesh loy. But let's say he actually has a little bit of wine, a little bit of oil. Ha yesh loy loy v'aleh kama tipin. Then you'll be allowed to borrow many tipin. Then you'll be allowed to borrow as much as you want. Approved to Rav Yitzchak, you're allowed to, once you have a little bit, you're allowed to borrow as much as you want. Now, what's the reason? Says Rashi, Kama Kurin, because in each and every bit of this halva, we say, Zute tachtel, it's in that place. That which he borrowed, Nizkekes al Perish Shebeshok. And the next thing you can borrow on meaning once the time of the halva it was mutter, then we don't care if you consume it afterwards, it's still always mutter. Therefore, you can borrow as much as you want against that little bit, says Rav Yitzchak. But the Mishnah taught us that if someone says, it's mutter, but Hillel forbade it. But Says the Gemara, it's not true. Say, Lamaisa, we do not paskin that way. A woman should not lend a loaf of bread. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Teaches Rav Yehuda the name of Shmuel. Zu divrei Hillel. This is only the opinion of Hillel. Avl Chachamim Oimrim. Teach the Chazal of him stam upayrim stam. One is allowed to borrow stam and pay back stam. Borrow a loaf of bread and pay back a loaf of bread. V'omer Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and teaches Rav Yehuda the name of Shmuel. B'nei Chabura makpidim zelzem. Ovim mishamido misham mishkol misham minyan misham level upayrim. B'nei Chabura that are makpid on each other, they could come to many averos. B'yom tov, on Yom Tov. Kedivrei Hillel, and according to Hillel, Av Misham, Ribbis, even come to Ribbis. But again, that's only going to be B'nei Chabura that are Makbidim Zazeh. But if they're not Makbidim Zazeh, then it won't be a problem. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Talmidei Chachamim, Mutarim Lelvoi Zebez Ami Ribbis. My time made the other the Ribbis Asura. And Umatanu Diavidin is giving you Matam. Armlei Shmuel Avu Bari, Halveni Mea Palpalin, B'mea of Estrin Palpalin, Varich. And you're allowed to do it. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Motzal Adam Alveni Lahalvais Benavu Bnei Beisai Beribis Kilat Iman Tam Ribis. Says Marv La Milsi Misham the Asi La Mitzrach, they might come to a custom. So it's an interesting yisaid. Yehuda Amar Rav was seemingly teaching us that you could teach someone to taste something, meaning, and they don't know it's usher. Says Gemara, no, we don't do that because we're afraid it might come to continue such a practice. And just to point out, this line of Talmidei Chachamim are allowed to borrow with ribbis. Why? Because they know it's usher and just giving you a matana. Just to point out the obvious difficulty, every case of ribbis is a matana, meaning when I borrow $100, I am so happy to pay back $120 because I need the cash. So what do you mean? It's always a matana, which is obviously a difficult point, but let's move on. Says the Mishnah. Now we're talking about not a classical borrowing, but an object or a service one would do for the other, and the other will do back for him. Weed for me today, and I'll weed for you tomorrow. And shovel for me. That you're allowed to say, but you're not allowed to say, you're not allowed to say, you weed for me and I'll dig for you. Eder me, you dig for me, and I will weed for you. That is not allowed. Call Yemei Garid, and we turn over to Ayin Hey Amid Beis, and you can already see the end of the parak in sight. Call Yemei Garid Echad. All the days of the Garid, which are the dry season, Echad, they're all considered one. All the days of the rainy season are considered one. And based upon that, says the Mishnah, one should not tell his friend, you help me in the summer, and I'll help you in the winter. That one should not do. Rav Gamliel Oimer, says Rav Gamliel, Yesh Ribis Mukdames, Yesh Ribis Ucheres. So after discussing a form of ribis, of lending services one to another, says the Gemara, says Rav Gamliel, Yesh Ribis Mukdames, Yesh Ribis Mucheres. Two types of ribis that we're going to see now, paying early, paying late. Ketzad. What's going on here, says Rav Gamliel. If someone set his eyes to borrow, and he sends him a gift, and he says, the reason why I'm giving you this gift is so that you're going to lend to me. Zuhi ribis mukdemes. It's a form of ribis. You're not paying back more, but before you even got the halva, you're sending him a gift so that you'll get the halva. That is also a form of ribis, says Rav Gamliel. On the flip side, lava amen, if you borrowed from him and you paid him back And after you pay him back, you send him something, you send him a gift, and you say, the reason why I'm giving you this lift is because the money that you were not able to use while I had it, Zui ribis mu'ucheres. And of course, this ribis mu'temes, ribis mu'ucheres is eye openers. As who wouldn't think? What do you mean? Akaras atayv. You give a gift. Says the Mishnah, that is aser. Rabbi Shimon Aimer, guess what? Is even yesh ribis b'dvarim. Even words could be ribis. Lo yomer lo da ki ba ish plani b'makam plani. Should not say, you should know that such and such is coming from such a place, meaning giving him information. If the borrower gives the lender critical information, that's also a form of ribis. And concludes the Mishnah, difficult words. Ve'elu oivrim b'loisa say, who is over on the issa of ribis, the malva v'aloiva v'ari ve'edim. The borrower, lender, the cosigner, and the witnesses, guess what? Even Af a Sefer, even the scribe, Iver Misham Lo Sitain, Misham Altikach Mietai, Misham Lo Si Aloi Kenaisha, Misham Lo Sim Lav Neshech, Misham Lo Neiver Lo Sitain, Mershal Veresim Lekecha, Ani Hashem. So everyone that is involved in the ribis loan is liable for an Isser De'araisa. Says the Gemara, Tanya, we learned in a Raisa, Reb Shimon ben Yochai Omer. Says the Heilige Rashbi Mina, you borrow money, and you don't usually say shalom to that guy. You're not allowed to go and greet him. How do I know? Even mere words is a form of ribis. The end of the Mishnah, the malva is over in all those Yisrum. The leiva is over Misham. The leiva is over from which three? And the Arev and the Eidim, the cosigner, and the winner says even over from El Misham Lo Sisin Love Kineshech shall place upon the Neshech upon someone else. Tani, we learned in a rice, Rabbi Shimon, Aimer, Malvei Rebbeis, Yez Mashem Arvichen Mafsid, more than they gain, they lose. And not only that, but not only that, but they regard Moshe Rabbeinu Chacham as a Talmud Chacham. V'Tayras Hayames. V'Aimrem Ilo Yodea Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe would have no Jei Revach V'Davar. Loi Haya Kaisva. It's as if they're denying the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Strong words. Kiyasar Avdimi 10 lines from the white lines. Amar. How do you know if you lend someone money and you know he doesn't have the money? If you can't make yourself seen by him because he's going to feel bad, he can't pay you back. To appear as a creditor if he cannot pay you back. Ravami and Ravasi say that when one acts as a creditor, then he's creating two types of punishments. Shenemar, harkavas enesh l'reishenu, banu ba'ish uba mayim. That to be pressed on for payment when he does not have it is two punishments of fire and water. Call me sheish le'ma'izu malva isan shaloi be'edim over mishal of the evil mirshal. Don't just think, no, what's the big deal? No, you're supposed to have edim. You're not supposed to create a situation where there could be a potential later on. Reish Lakish Amar, Goyim Klal Latzmo, a curse, and Ember Atalmenu, Sifsei, Sheker, Adivres al Sadik, Talemna, Te Olamna, excuse me, Adivres al Sadik, Osak, may these lying lips be silent, speak falsehood about the Sadik. Amru Le Rabbanan the Ravashi, say the Rabbanan to Ravashi, Kamekayim Ravina, Kol Madam Rabbanon. Ravina fulfills everything the Rabbanon said. Shalch le bahade panya demali Shabbat. So Ravashi sent to Ravina the following message right for Shabbos. Lishter limar asara zuzi. Please send me 10 zuzi. Tisrar meli katina dara, because a small piece of land came up. Limits and I want to buy. Shalch le, he wrote back. Nesi mar sadi, send me witnesses. V'nichtav kasva. And we'll write it down. Meaning he tested him and he passed the test. that he said he would not lend it to him without writing down the shtar with Eidim. Shalach le'afilu no, even I, nami. Shalach le kol shekein mar the Torah begirsa. You're tired and you're learning, Mishali, V'garim Klala, that's what you're going to forget about the loan. You're going to cause a Klala. So we see it's not like a not nice thing to ask someone to write down the halva. It's Lamaisa, the right thing to do. And we conclude, and the three people that cry out, but they're not answered. Veilu hein, Mishish Leimo, Yisumavo, his son's own asman, he lends them, Shaloi Be'edim. V'akuna Adam La'atzmai, someone who acquires a master to himself. We'll see in a moment. And Misha Ishtai, Moishel Salav, his wife, rules upon him. My kada adan la'asa, what does that mean? My ikadam return a chas of benachri, that he says his properties belong to a guy. Ikadami akos chas labanav b'chayov. Ikadami, and some say tibish le b'hamasa. He's unsuccessful in the town that he lives. La'azla masachriti, he doesn't go to another town. He's like koina adan la'atzmai, that he's not getting himself out of this horrible situation. Hadron aloch ezeu neshech, certainly a chazara worthy parek, a difficult parek. Psiyata de Shemaya. The next year we'll begin with the sixth parek in Mirza Hashem.